Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. And honestly, you need to brace yourselves for this one. We all know the haunting story of Lynette Hooker, the woman who vanished into thin air in the beautiful waters of the Bahamas. For weeks, we've been listening to her husband Brian's heartbreaking story about how the ocean turned violent, creating terrifying 2 to 4 foot waves that ripped his wife away while he stood helpless with a broken paddle. But forget everything you've heard up until now. A newly uncovered, devastating piece of evidence has just surfaced, and it completely shatters Brian's entire alibi. We have obtained a time-stamped photograph taken at the exact minute Brian claims his wife went under. The water? It wasn't an angry sea. It was as calm as a sheet of glass, so shallow you could literally stand up in it. This changes absolutely everything and shifts a chilling cloud of suspicion directly onto Brian. Do not skip a single second of this video, because if you miss even one detail, you won't understand how deep this deception really goes. Smash that like button, subscribe right now so you never miss a breakthrough, and let's move straight toward the evidence. The photograph taken at Aunt Pat's Bay at exactly 7:41 in the evening is the smoking gun that changed everything. At that exact moment, Brian Hooker was telling authorities that a massive storm had rolled in, creating terrifying, violent waves that swallowed his wife whole. He claimed the winds were howling so loudly he couldn't hear her screams, and that the raging current separated their small dinghy instantly. But look at this picture. The water is so still, you can see the reflection of the sky on the surface. There are no 2 to 4 foot waves. There is no raging current. In fact, the water in that specific spot is so incredibly shallow that a grown man could easily step out of the boat and stand up with the water barely hitting his waist. For an experienced, physically strong former Marine, wading through that glass-like water to save his wife would have taken zero effort. Yet Brian stood by and watched her disappear. This massive lie leaves investigators with one burning question. If there was no storm, what actually happened to Lynette in those quiet, shallow waters? The deception deepens when you look at what Brian did immediately after his wife supposedly drowned. As a suspect, he wasn't immediately locked up because federal investigations take time to build a rock-solid case. Brian used this exact window of freedom to make his move. Instead of staying in the Bahamas to join the search parties or help local divers look for Lynette, he secretly packed his bags. With the help of his sister, who flew into the islands to secure an emergency passport, Brian fled the country entirely. Our sources have tracked his movements, and he has been running a frantic circle inside the United States to avoid the media. He first hid out at his sister's home in Sacramento, California, before vanishing again and resurfacing thousands of miles away in Michigan, where he immediately hired a high-powered criminal defense attorney. He is moving like a man who knows the clock is ticking, running between states while refusing to answer why his story matches absolutely nothing on that photograph. But the most disturbing part of his flight is how he acts when he thinks no one is watching. While volunteers are spending their own money on boat gas, risking their lives to search the thick, razor-sharp limestone rocks of Lubbers Quarters Key, Brian hasn't shed a single tear or helped look for a shoreline clue. Local witnesses saw him right before he fled, just sitting calmly on a porch at the local inn, sipping a drink and staring blankly at the ocean. He didn't call Lynette's family to tell them she was missing until 24 hours after the incident. When a man loses the love of his life in a tragic accident, he stays until every inch of sand is turned over. Brian didn't just leave, he ran. And as federal investigators from the Coast Guard Investigative Service quiet down to build their final trap, the evidence left behind on their boat is about to scream. The terror of what happened on that boat becomes even more chilling when you look at the technology Brian thought he could outsmart. The couple's 46-foot sailboat, the Soulmate, was packed with high-tech marine gear, including a highly advanced thermal imaging mast camera. This specific camera is designed to see perfectly in pitch black darkness. And many boaters keep them running 24 hours a day so they can check on their vessel from their phones while on shore. Federal agents from the Coast Guard Investigative Service have officially finished processing the boat, stripping every piece of electronic memory from its core. If that thermal camera was active on Easter Sunday, it didn't just capture the weather. It recorded every single movement Brian and Lynette made when they returned to the vessel. Investigators are currently scrubbing these files, looking for the exact moment the dinghy tied up to the side of the hull, which would prove Lynette was alive well after Brian claims she fell into the ocean. Brian is no ordinary boater. He is a massive tech geek who spent years working for AT&T, where he learned exactly how to manipulate tracking devices. In fact, he was fired from his job after company executives caught him secretly hacking the GPS tracking system on his work van to hide his real location. He knows exactly how digital footprints work, and investigators believe he used this specific knowledge to execute a high-tech cover-up on the water. The dinghy's electric motor was a brand new propulsion system, which transmits live data via Bluetooth directly to a user's smartphone. But here is the critical twist that Brian likely calculated. The manufacturer states that this specific engine does not store any tracking history on the motorhead itself. Instead, every single piece of location data, throttle usage, and timing is written directly onto the microchips inside the lithium batteries. Because the local police took days to realize a crime had occurred, Brian was left completely alone on his boat with full access to that equipment. He had a secondary backup engine on board, and sources close to the investigation strongly suspect he swapped the motors or deliberately threw the primary lithium batteries deep into the ocean. By destroying those specific power cells, he effectively erased the digital map of where that dinghy traveled between 8 in the evening and 4 in the morning. He thought that by dropping those batteries into a deep hole in the sand, his movements would remain a permanent secret. But federal prosecutors don't need a confession when the suspect's own words begin to trap him. While Brian was busy trying to erase his digital tracks, his own mouth was creating a trap he could never escape. When a person is telling the absolute truth, their story never changes, no matter how many times you ask them to repeat it. But as the pressure began to mount, Brian started telling completely different versions of Lynette's final moments to anyone who would listen. First, he told the search and rescue teams that after Lynette fell out of the dinghy, he distinctly saw her swimming south, directly toward their big sailboat, the Soulmate. But just a few hours later, when he washed ashore at Marsh Harbor, he told a completely different story to a boatyard security guard. He told that guard his wife was actually swimming north, in the exact opposite direction, trying to reach a completely different island called Hopetown. The ultimate betrayal came when he called Lynette's own family on Easter Sunday, nearly 24 hours after she vanished. He spoke directly to her stepmother, Kathy, and gave her a third, shocking variation that left the family completely paralyzed with doubt. He told Kathy that because it was pitch black dark outside, he threw a seat cushion toward Lynette, but couldn't tell if she grabbed it. And the last thing he saw was his wife swimming straight toward the shore. 3 completely different stories pointing in 3 completely opposite directions: south toward the boat, north toward the island, or straight toward the coastline. If you are a trained Marine watching your wife drown in calm, clear water, how do you confuse something so traumatic? A jury will look at these shifting stories and see the desperate panic of a man trying to cover up a dark secret. The final piece of this disturbing puzzle lies hidden within the brutal geography of the Bahamas itself. For weeks, rumors spread that a secret federal indictment had already been signed, or that Brian had completely vanished into a country without an extradition treaty. But federal agents are playing a much bigger chess game. In the United States federal system, prosecutors rarely make an arrest based on simple suspicion. They wait until 95% of their case is completely flawless. Right now, investigators are focusing directly on the physical terrain of Lubbers Quarters Key, where a local volunteer named Nathan has been conducting intense ground searches. Many viewers believe Brian might have buried Lynette on one of the island's secluded beaches. But the actual topography reveals a much darker reality that makes a hidden grave impossible.